Okay, I think we're good to get started. So as a startup question, do you mind like sharing your background and your role at FAU?
Yeah. So my name's David Cinalli. I've been at FAU for a long time now. I think this is my 12th year. So my position here is I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Stiles-Nicholson Brain Institute. But it's a little bit of a unique postdoc because my work is totally focused on community outreach and neuroscience. So specifically, I manage the MobileMinds program, which is a program where we have a van where we go out and visit schools all throughout the region of South Florida, and we do some hands-on engaging neuroscience activities, things like sheep brain dissections and games that teach students how neurons use electricity and chemicals in order to communicate, and how all of that is relevant to their own mental health, but also to the research that we do and the day to day here in our research labs. So, kind of with the goal of to get students excited about science and also sort of peel back the curtain to be like, to reduce the stigma of, the separation between science and the media and the mainstream culture, right? Because I feel like sometimes in research we can be in sort of an ivory tower. So we're just trying to bridge the worlds to make that transition for students easier so that they can realize that if they like science, then it's possible for them.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I would have loved a program like Mobile Minds when I was in middle school. So like your work is very much appreciated, truly. And kind
Yeah,
of
me
like,
too. I didn't get to do any of that cool stuff when I was in school.
yeah, I think the program is truly unique in the fact that you're like the director of it and you're so driven in all of your activities. I think it's incredible. Like your work is truly like remarkable.
Well, thanks. I don't know if I deserve all that, but it's kind of I'm lucky in that I have a really fun job. I get to sort of be relaxed in our presentations, and we're there to have fun, but also to learn. It was kind of something that we started when I was a graduate student here. So I did my graduate work at FAU in the Stackman lab, and I studied learning and memory. But I reached the point in my trajectory there where I realized that, I don't know if a career as a lab bench scientist is the best fit for me. I enjoyed what I was doing, but sort of the further that you progress along and your career in research, you have to do more and more of the grant writing and publishing, and you deal with a lot of rejection. And for me, so a lot of that was really painful, but I really, at the same time, I discovered I had a passion for teaching. So really, I never grew up to begin with, so might as well take what we're doing in science and bring it to kids in schools because I feel like I can speak their language
Mhm.
and we can take these advanced concepts and try to give it to them at a level that's more digestible.
Breaking it down for sure. Yeah. And kind of like building on the topic of neuroscience, like, is there a particular event or like moment in your life that like led you to pursue neuroscience in particular? Like, how did you get involved in neuroscience education and outreach?
That's so funny that you asked that because the topic that I taught this morning in our behavioral neuroscience class, which both you,
Mhm.
Sneha, and Alice have been in that class, um, we were teaching the auditory system this morning, and
Oh,
that
cool.
was the moment when I was a student as an undergraduate that my mind was blown, ironically, right? And learning how mechanically gated ion channels that are being pried apart on the cilia of these hair cells when your sound waves are traveling through your cochlea, and how that allows for them to depolarize. And now we're getting into the nitty gritty of neuroscience jargon, right? But that whole process and how you get a sound wave coming from the air to be translated into a signal that the brain interprets as music and language and
Mhm.
all the sounds that make up our world that we appreciate, and how your brain assigns meaning and extrapolates identities based off of those things. That was sort of a mind-blowing moment, right, for me, and how I got into neuroscience. Because my story is kind of it's non-linear, it's not traditional, right? I actually started off as a pharmacy student. And I went to Wilkes University, which is up in Northeast Pennsylvania, which is a really troubled and tough part of the country. So I experienced a lot there in my time, but I really wasn't a focused student, to be honest with you. I was more interested in, being social and having fun. And I was a football player at the time, so I was really focused on football, but I wasn't focused on my academics, right? Because it was kind of, I wasn't making wise choices, and I ended up failing out of the pharmacy program, which was very competitive after my freshman year. And that's when I kind of accidentally found myself in a behavioral neuroscience class, right? So that serendipitous moment where, things started to click. And so neuroscience was really the first thing that I was really passionate about learning in my college career. So we didn't have a major at our school at Wilkes University, which ironically, we're here at Wilkes Honors College now. So it's funny how these things parallel. Um, but we did have a neuroscience minor. So I switched my major to psychology. I minored in neuroscience. I took every neuroscience course I possibly could. But even then, I really didn't have any exposure to any real research activity. There wasn't a real neuroscience research conglomerate in our area. Our school didn't have any neuroscience labs. Really didn't know what it meant to be in a research program, but I applied anyway, right? And
Mhm.
actually, FAU was the only school I applied to. Again, I don't prescribe my methods, right? Sometimes listening to me, you might learn what not to do. But I got into the psychology program here, into the master's program. And so it was kind of like I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I kind of hit the ground running because one thing that I knew how to do is I knew how to keep my mouth shut and my ears open and to learn as much as I could. So I finally got an opportunity in a research lab and I tried to just absorb as much as I could. And eventually I got, assigned a research project and finished my master's thesis. And my PI, Dr. Stackman at the time, was like, "Hey, it seems to go really well here. Have you thought about applying to the PhD program?" And he said that he would support me in doing so. So, kind of just rolled right into the PhD afterwards. So, in getting those experiences and research and really really finding passion and enjoyment in curiosity in understanding different systems in the brain, now diving down and focusing in and narrowing in on one system so that you become the expert. In my case, it was learning and memory and non-spatial memory, right?
Mhm.
um, and really like digging down. It's kind of really intimidating in the beginning. I was going to all these seminars that are offered here, listening to some of the top scientists from around the world, talk about their research. And I didn't understand a lot of the techniques and the terminology that they were talking about. But little by little, as I entered my third and fourth year in graduate school, like I was pretty familiar with a lot of the current, trends and techniques in science. So there was definitely this barrier that I understood existed. It can be, I think everybody talks about imposter syndrome, right? And I think everybody feels that when you're in that stage where it's really intimidating, you don't know what's going on around you. But going through that transition to where, like, oh, I'm actually kind of comfortable now and I can have these conversations with some of the top researchers around the world. And that's really fun and cool because we're all human at the end of the day, right? But knowing that that's sort of just a process that if you continue to work at, you'll arrive to the point where now you belong. So I try to bring that message with me to trainees, such as yourselves, right? That in the beginning it can kind of feel intimidating and scary, but if you stay at it and you work at it, you finally find, where you belong.
No, truly. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. But like kind of building on, I know you mentioned you did research in both learning and memory. Do you integrate your like research background into your like teaching and like outreach efforts? And if so, like how, like what are the ways in which you do so?
Well, yeah, for sure. I'm always biased when it comes to like the topic of learning and memory. So when if you find yourself in my class, we might spend a little extra time on those kinds of topics, and as well as we're out in the community, right? But I find as the position that I'm in, I kind of have to be at least somewhat well versed in all the areas of research that are relevant, to human disease and mental health. So, a lot of times, some of the pressing issues have to deal with, depression and addiction, right? Because those are the things that are felt so closely in our communities now. But also things like Alzheimer's disease, because usually everybody can relate to whether they have a family member of their own that suffers from it, or they have a friend that is going through something like that with an elder family member. So yeah, I do get to go into the learning and memory stuff, but I've got to be a little bit of a jack of all trades in a sense of being able to communicate. But at the same time, going back to the imposter syndrome, I'm not an expert in all those areas, right? But being 13 years now in training in neuroscience, you have something to say at least, about all those different areas. But you don't have to be an absolute expert on that. Like it's okay to say, that's a really good question. I actually haven't thought about it that way. And, I'd have to do a little bit more research. And I'd love to get back to you about that. You but you also get a sense of what's the public's perception of neuroscience. What is it that they're interested in? How does science intersect with what they care about in their life? And that's been a really interesting process.
Okay, so I know you talked a bit about imposter syndrome. So I know that imposter syndrome is like a big thing for college students, but especially in the scientific community. So, what advice do you have for students who may be nervous about getting started in research, and how can they overcome initial challenges or self-doubt?
Yeah, I mean, especially in the halls of academia, there can be a lot of pressure, especially certain labs have different cultures, and depending on what kind of a situation you feel yourself in, you might be feeling a lot of pressure. What I try to say for students is, don't allow yourself to be sucked into a toxic environment. Number one, you don't have to put up with that kind of a thing. Basic human decency is not asking too much, right? So if you do find yourself in one of those situations, don't be afraid of, trying to seek another opportunity in a different lab, or finding a mentor that's actually more aligned with your learning style or your goals and your career goals. Maybe you're more independently driven, or maybe you might find that you might want to collaborate more in a team-oriented environment. Both of those things are good. You just got to find the right fit for you. But overall, when it comes to imposter syndrome, I try to tell people don't believe the hype, right? There tends to be a lot of ego posturing that happens. I think it's just human nature, really. But in the science world, there's certainly this, this is my claim, and I need to have credit for this. And I'd say don't buy the hype. Don't buy that. Like it doesn't need to be that way. And you may not be able to change the culture of a place from your position as a trainee, but also you don't need to conform to it, right? There's a way to get in and do the things that you need to do without compromising your values, right? And so don't buy the hype that you're not good enough. Everybody starts somewhere. Even Nobel Prize winners started at the bottom somewhere, and we all have a different starting point. But what matters is the direction that you're headed, right? Are you doing the things to continue to enrich yourself? Now, that's the other side of it. You can't just sit back on your heels and expect to get all the things that you want without putting in the work, right? I do recommend, a little bit of humility in the beginning, especially as you're starting, because if you're willing to put your nose to the grindstone, so to speak, and do the hard work on the front end, it will pay off for you. But in terms of, those who make you feel less than, that inner voice inside of your head, don't buy it. It's not real. That's not the truth, right? We all have a starting point, and what really matters is, are you moving forward? Are you progressing? Stay motivated, stay on track, get yourself out of toxic environments, avoid those situations as you learn about the toxic pitfalls and the situations of the dynamics that can develop. Stay away from them as best you can, and don't be afraid to reach out and talk about it. Don't suffer in silence, right? There's lots of other people in science, whether they're trainees or people who are more advanced in their career, who have been in the situations that likely you're facing right now. And most of them are happy to talk about it, right? I think most of us just feel afraid to ever even broach that kind of a conversation. But at the end of the day, we are human, and so many people do find that they enjoy talking with people and helping them and talking them through their situations, right? So that's what got me through graduate school, leaning on relationships and building those networks with people, not always just to get something from them, but just to for the sake of camaraderie, right? And you never know when a relationship is going to pay off later on down the road, right? So definitely just stay at it, right? Stay at it. That's what I would say.
That's really great. Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to focus on your outreach work right now. Science communication is like really important, and it's equally as important as research. And so, could you share a memorable experience from your outreach work that you believe highlights its importance?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, there's a lot. I think some of the trips that we do for outreach that are the most near and dear to my heart are those in the correction system. And I've been really fortunate to build inroads within juvenile detention facilities, and especially up in Fort Pierce, the St. Lucie Regional Detention Center. And those are students who, I mean, it's almost unbelievable how rough they had it growing up. I mean, it's like they're brought into this world and they really don't have a chance. They're being bombarded from day one. And but yet you still see that spark of curiosity and that tenacity in them, despite all the struggles that they're dealing with addiction and abuse and the hostile environment that they're in. There's fights happening all the time, and there's dynamics within the prison setting that you deal with the hierarchies there. But all these kids, at some point, most of them will have a release date, right? So they've got to integrate back into society. And while they're there, their time still counts towards their grade, and they're still in school, right? That's what's kind of unique about the juvenile system. In adult prisons, you're not legally mandated to be in school, but the prison and the school are one in the juvenile case, and there's lots to say about that, but in those environments, to see that curiosity, that light bulb go off, and they have ways of letting you know that are sort of unique, that they value what you're doing, right? And you'll hear all kinds of crazy stuff. Like we were doing a sheep brain dissection with the girls group, and one of the students, as we're dissecting the sheep brain, I don't think she even raised her hand. She just blurted out, "I overdosed on fentanyl last week. What part of my brain was that?" And the girl next to her slapped her in the arm and said, "That wasn't last week. That was 3 weeks ago, you idiot." And it's kind of like one of those moments that's eye-opening to let you know that, hey, there's a lot of people dealing with some really serious circumstances in life, and we like to complain a lot. I don't complain nearly as much anymore because of experiences like that. And so they also have weird ways of complimenting you and knowing and letting you know that they value what you're doing, right? So, a lot of times, they plan fights, right? And so there was this one group of boys, they had planned a fight at breakfast, and then they come into our class, and I'm there to visit with a couple of our students to do an activity, and they waited until the class was over to have their fight, which I know it's not a joke, right? And it's not something to be condoned at all, right? But the fact that they saw that opportunity as something like, hey, like we want to be here and we want to do this, right? And so I've had conversations with students in there that have aspirations of getting into medical school one day and getting into science. They want to be nurses. They want to study the medical field. Some of them want to be marine biologists, and they had never met a scientist before. They had never known sort of like what a scientist is like. A lot of times you just know what you see on TV, whether you see like mad scientists and kids cartoons the characters that are portrayed in shows like The Big Bang Theory that are really super brilliant and speak in like really complicated lab jargon that nobody really knows what they're saying, right? And that's part of the humor of the show, and I get it. But the reality is that science is done by everyday people like you and me, right? So it's really amazing to bring the message. So like, hey, anything's possible for you. Just because this is where you find yourself right now, that's not where you need to stay. There's lots of room in your own community at FAU, right, to get in and study science and to change your trajectory. So anyway, that's a long rambling answer, but I think those are some of the experiences that are closest to my heart.
No, that's really cool. So, how do you think neuroscience outreach programs like the Mobile Minds help promote mental health awareness in schools?
Well, number one, it's letting children know that we hear them, right? And we understand what they're going through and that it's normal. I think a lot of people, like I say, suffer in silence and they don't understand why they feel sad all the time. They don't understand why they hear these voices in their head that tell them to do awful things. They don't understand why they can't be accepted by their classmates, and to bring the message that hey, this is normal, this is part of the human experience, and there are a lot more people that are going through this than you might think. And in fact, they're all around you, but everybody's staying quiet about it, right? But if we can demystify it, if you can be as as students that join me on these class trips, if you could be a voice that says, "Hey, yeah, I actually know what you're talking about because I go through that too." And then you can give them the courage to come out and talk about their experiences, right? And just the simple act of verbalizing it and communicating what it is that you're going through, you as a listener, just being listening, you're giving them a message that of acceptance, right? I accept your experience, I validate it, and I see what you're going through. I may not go through it myself, and I may not understand from that perspective, but I can empathize with you, right? And maybe I don't have a solution for you, but just that act of listening and saying, "Hey, it's okay to go through these things." I think that has a dramatic effect on the psychology, especially of young minds, right? There's more and more pressure that these kids go through, right? And the fact that we have the world at our fingertips through our cell phones is not always a good thing. So so yeah, that it always for me comes down to that real human experience.
For sure. Communication is key, you know.
Hmm.
Um, Kind of, I had a couple questions kind of shifting gears to mental health, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm curious, how do you manage your own mental health to prevent burnout? And like, what are some effective ways to like support mental well-being that you can share with us?
Oh man, I'm not always great at managing burnout. Um, I do tend to overwork myself, I think. Um, I mean, for a good reason. I mean, at least there's a good intention, right? I really do enjoy my work, but I think I need to do a little bit better at pacing myself and making sure I have time. So I think I'm improving at that. When I first started these community outreach, I said yes to everything. I scheduled 4 and 5 school trips per week, and I found myself burning out. And for me, that looks like eating junk food, not getting enough sleep, not getting exercise, and over time that really compounds. And so for me, those were the ways that I was not taking care of myself, right? So I think the things that I do now, I try to make sure that I make room for those things, even, not to get into the motivational speaking, but even when you don't want to, you got to go to the gym, whatever it is that motivates you to get moving, you got to do those things. You got to maintain a regular sleep schedule, and do all those things for your physical health, right? But for me, I think the biggest thing for my mental health has been understanding my purpose, and that's a very subjective thing. And what motivates you in your life and what gives you meaning in your life. But for me, what I found is that being in service of others makes me incredibly happy. and that gives me a reason for living. And that's the whole, that's probably the most important thing in life, right? Is to understand, what is it that I can do to make the world a better place, even in just the little ways. If you can understand your purpose in life, it's like a huge weight is lifted. And not to say that if you don't know your purpose, you don't know what motivates you right now, that should stress you out. There's so much time. You got plenty of time, right? So open your horizons, try new things, try volunteering. Go. There's plenty of community organizations here that help people in many different aspects. Like I happen to be a super nerdy scientist, so I found a way, and I'm very fortunate that I found a way that I could do it through science, right? But maybe you're bilingual and you want to work with students or people and with assimilating into culture because they have trouble with speaking English, right? So maybe you can teach people simple skills like how to do their taxes or how to manage a credit card account, right? Maybe you like feeding the hungry or going and volunteering to feed the homeless or those kinds of things, right? Find something. Maybe you like just organizing a workout group. And maybe it's here on campus, and you get a group of people together and I don't know, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's boxing, whatever it is that you like to do. Like, however you can give to other people, I find that's what really motivates me, and that's what makes me happy. So, I encourage you see how you can be a member of the community, how you can be of service of others.
No, I completely agree. I mean, you touched on like volunteering. I volunteer every Saturday at the soup kitchen. And like truly it's the highlight of my week. Like I look forward to Saturdays, not only because it's the weekend, but also because I have a shift. And I'm like, I it truly like changes my perspective in the world because it's remarkable like what certain institutions do, but also like what you do in helping your community. That's why like I love participating in MobileMinds and helping you in whatever you may need, you know.
Yeah, and I think, in our society, we're constantly getting bombarded with information from our media sources that is always negative all the time.
Mhm.
And I get it. There's lots of reasons to be concerned. And there's lots of crazy stuff happening. But if that's all you're exposing yourself to all the time, how can you expect yourself to maintain any semblance of sanity, any semblance of mental health? The truth, though, the reality is that this world is full of good people too. And there's lots of people out there that are doing amazing things, right? And maybe you
Mhm.
don't have to be a world changer, right? In terms of being a CEO or being the head of a nonprofit that's starting something, but just doing a small part and getting exposed to these people, getting exposed to this positive energy. I don't think people understand how influential that is on your own thought process, right? Because we're constantly getting stuck in these cycles of negative thought patterns, and we don't really know how to break out of it, right? But really, the answer is you got to get up and move your feet and go and expose yourself to different cultures, different communities, different people with different mindsets that aren't, and get yourself out of these negative feedback loops. I think it's so important.
For sure. I agree. Thank you for sharing. Um, I know you touched a little bit on burnout before, and you've experienced burnout. So I think burnout also comes with the lack of sleep. And so on that topic, like, do you have any tips on what students can do to improve their sleep habits? And like, can you give us like insight on how sleep can affect mental health?
Oh yeah, I mean, disrupting your sleep has a cascade of effects, right? Especially when it comes to management of stress, your metabolism, your brain, your memory. If you're constantly struggling in class and you're having trouble studying, if you're not sleeping, that's going to compound things. I think a lot of people think, the night before an exam, I need to stay up all night to get in as much study time as possible. But if you think about the memory system, one of the things we teach about is that consolidation of memories happens during your sleep, right? So if you don't get your sleep, none of that information is going to be locked in place. You're not going to hold on to it, right? So I know like it can be difficult to manage schedules, and time management is definitely a skill that needs to be worked at. But it's super important to make sure that you have some sort of routine to make sure that you're getting regular sleep. I get it. Maybe if you want to go on the weekends and stay up late and have fun, yeah, that's all good. But at least during the week, make sure you're giving yourself that opportunity to rest. And I think everybody has a different routine that they like to do at night. You really have to give your brain a chance to unwind and relax. And so whether that looks like putting Instagram and TikTok down for a while and just actually being quiet and present in the moment for maybe just like 10, 15 minutes, kind of limiting that screen time as you're ready to go to sleep. We all know about the effects on melatonin levels. If you don't, the blue lights from your screen really messes up the melatonin levels in your brain, makes you think that the sun's still out, and makes you want to wake up again, right? So, there's little things you can do like that. And also, listen, exercise also makes me really want to go to sleep. So everything sort of goes together, right? So if I know I hit it hard at the gym today, I'm sort of physically exhausted. That's gonna help me sleep as well. So I guess it's a complicated answer,
Yeah, I'm a victim of doom scrolling, so I need to work on that.
huh? We've all been there.
So from a neuroscientific perspective, how do you think chronic stress impacts the brain, and what can students do to counteract these effects?
Oh, acute stress, has a lot of positive benefits. Cortisol, the stress hormone, neurotransmitter, it's not necessarily the bad guy, but what you don't want is chronic stress. Chronic stress has a prolonged effect that essentially is going to limit your nervous system's ability to recover. And, you really don't want to be in a prolonged state of stress, whether that's like fight or flight situations. A lot of times we see, I always go back to students and kids. A lot of times you see behavior outbursts in kids because they're constantly in stressed out environment. They're constantly stressed, and they're experiencing a flood of fight or flight hormones like adrenaline, right? So they're constantly in this full throttle state, even though they don't look it, even though they might have a flat affect, right? Subtle things might set them off in a negative way. And you never know who around you is going through that, right? That state. And something that seems totally innocuous, something that seems totally innocent might set them off. And so for me, knowledge is power, and understanding that these behaviors that you see either in yourself or in those around you could have causes that are actually pretty logical, right? When it comes to stress and being under threat, at least perceived threat in the brain, right? That's going to cause erratic behavior. So if you understand that, that allows you some room to be compassionate, right? So that you can recognize these signs in yourself and in others and say, hey, maybe I need to incorporate ways either for myself through stress management techniques. Maybe you like meditation. Maybe you like playing games. Maybe you like getting out and going for a walk, spending time on the beach. Like this ties back into that mental health thing, right? You've got to put these measures in place to make sure that you're regulating your nervous system, right? You're getting yourself out of those stress situations, and that at least you're giving. I know that sometimes prolonged stress can be difficult to avoid, right, because of circumstances that are around us. But we can at least give ourselves breaks from that, right? You don't have to be in that mode 24/7, right? Give your body a chance to sort of reset itself.
Okay, so I know we talked about stress. Now, I mean, college students are really stressful and they balance a lot of things at the same time. So, What advice do you have for students trying to balance research, academics, and extracurricular activities effectively?
Mm. I think number one, give yourself a break. Don't beat yourself up if you find yourself dropping the ball and trying to juggle all these things. You're new at it, right? This is what college is for. You're trying to essentially learn how to manage all these different responsibilities that are sort of newly on your plate, right? And I think it's understood from like my perspective, because I work with a lot of college students and trainees, it's understood that you're a student and you're going to make mistakes. I think the thing is try not to make the same mistake over and over again, right? If you run into a lesson, do your best to improve and to learn that lesson. Not to say that if you make it the same mistake twice that you're going to get, fired or whatever it is. But if you make the same mistake over and over and over and over again, that's a sign that, hey, maybe you're not paying attention to the lesson that you're supposed to be learning here. But a little bit of forgiveness for yourself goes a long way. And I think one of the patterns that I used to get myself in is when I held myself to a standard that was way too high. How could I expect myself as a college student or as a graduate student that's in their first or second year? How could I expect myself to be perfect and to not make mistakes and to, and if something doesn't work out perfect the first time, like, why am I getting upset? Everybody goes through that, right? It's expected, right? So, I would say try not to put excessive pressure on yourself to do everything perfectly. You're allowed to make some mistakes, but give it your best effort. And if you do mess up, be humble and apologize. Take accountability for it. Don't, there's a lot of perceived fear that comes with making mistakes. And I think what we tend to do is try to hide it and sweep it under the rug and hope that nobody finds out about it. But I think if you take the high road and you take accountability and you're honest and forthright with yourself and with others, what you find is not only do you find that the consequences weren't as bad as you thought they were going to be, but you find that you gain some respect with people and that they can respect the fact that you were big enough to acknowledge that you fell short and that you're giving a genuine effort to do better next time, right? These are, basic things I think that, we're taught through the stories and the things that we see as children, but now's the time where we have an opportunity to put it into practice, right? So a little bit of courage, a little bit of bravery, and a little bit of forgiveness for yourself, I would say.
No, that sounds great. Thank you so much. That was kind of continuing on where we left off. Our second to last question was, do you have any promising advancements in like neuroscience that you know of? Let it be like future ones or like any past ones that you think could improve mental health treatments in the future or that like have done so in the past?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I think, I really like the studies that show sort of they shed light on how we run our experiments in the lab. I think especially in the systems neuroscience end, which is like dealing with animal work and animal research, we've kind of got our set ways of doing things. And especially if you're looking at mental health, whether you're studying depression, anxiety, mania, whatever it is, especially in like rat and mouse models, we have a certain way of housing the animals, and it's not really conducive to their natural environment, right?
Mhm.
I think what's really informative is understanding like the more that you add enrichment to the lab animal's environment, it changes their vulnerability to things like addiction and depressive like behaviors and aggression. And so I think that's there's lots of amazing advancements in molecular technology. I think having new targets for drugs that can help people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, that's super important to get them out of that space immediately and to sort of give them a shift. But what I really love is to see, what do we do after that? Because then you've got to meet the patient, you got to meet the person, and sort of walk with them and try to, do these long-term interventions that have lasting effects, right? And things like antidepressants are very valuable and good in doing that initial, just preventing you in the initial phase. But we've got to have a more holistic approach about, integrating a new way of thinking, a new psychology, a new sort of reconceptualizing the way you live your life in a way. And a lot of these studies that look at enrichment and look at the quality of life for the animals in their experiments show that the more that they're isolated and the more that they don't have a lot of enrichment in their environment, the more susceptible they are to addiction, depression, and all those things. And I think that's really informative about how we live in how our culture sort of has assimilated around, being in a single apartment, by yourself. And even though there's more and more people and we're more and more connected virtually, we're less connected in person, right? So our nervous system has adapted to living in communities. We're social creatures, we're social beings. We're supposed to belong to communities. We're supposed to have this give and take, and be a member of something that's bigger than just ourselves. And I think when it comes to mental health, a lot of times what's become normal in our living patterns sort of has these detrimental effects on our mental well-being. And so I get really excited about unveiling that. So maybe that's not the technical science answer that you wanted, but that's just the way I think about it. Like I think, the advancements in science also should go hand in hand with what we understand about psychology and what we understand about human nature, right? So I'm excited to see more and more inroads in communication between those two sides of things.
No, yeah, I agree. I mean, I was just curious into your perspective, with your background and your knowledge. You have you have like tons of like years under your belt in terms of neuroscience. I was just curious about your insight on all this.
Thanks for calling me old. I appreciate
No, no. Oh no. Oh no, no, never. I mean, I'm turning 20 next week, so I feel like I'm no longer going to be a
Wait,
teenager.
over the hill, Alice, aren't we? It's all done in there.
The gray hairs are going to start. Um, I think I want to thank you so much for your time today, like truly taking time out of your schedule. I know like with MobileMinds, you're busy, busy always. So as a final question, do you have any lasting words for anyone watching the recording or any final thoughts?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to be yourself. I feel like it's super cliche. And you hear it a lot. But it's okay to be weird and it's okay to be unique. I think, as obviously as long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting others, but there's room for you to be an individual and to be who you are. And we actually need your unique abilities. We need your unique talents, your unique perspective. We need you because that's what it's going to take to make the world a better place for those around you. So I think we have all this pressure to conform and to be what people expect you to be, whether it's your parents or your teachers or even your friends, right? Sometimes your friends aren't really your friends, which is a whole other conversation. But essentially, you have a lot of unique talents, abilities, perspective, and we need you. As a society, as a culture, as a community, we need you. And so that's the only way that we're going to improve our situation here is by people stepping up and being a part of something that's bigger than themselves and bringing what they have at the table. And let's try to look at each other instead of in judgment. Let's look at each other with acceptance and understand everybody has a different background, a different set of circumstances. And there's a lot of different ways of thinking. And sometimes a different solution calls for a different or different problem calls for different solutions at different times, right? And it can be confusing. Sometimes the right answer isn't always the right answer. So just the understanding that we need each other. And so also I want to say thanks to the both of you because this is awesome what you guys are doing, not only with this podcast, but I know with from personal experience that you both take a lot of time to reach out and volunteer your time and help others. not only with the Mobile Minds program, but I'll tell you, when I was in your position, when I was your age as a college student, I wasn't thinking about spending my time helping others. So, I kind of look up to you in that way, in that you came to that understanding well before I did in my life. So, you have my respect and my gratitude, and I appreciate, and I hope to work with you guys a lot more in the future.
You can't get rid of us yet.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for your time, truly. Like, I understand you're such a busy man and you do so much for both all of us, for the kids, for Mobile Minds and the Brain Institute and FAU as a whole. Like, we're so lucky to have you and I'm lucky to have had you as a professor, truly, and a mentor on this campus. So I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us and answer all of our questions.
Are you trying to make me cry? That's not
No,
nice.
no, 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 never.